should be fine. Okay, the channel is live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Watching 100 Movies. I am Christiana Ellis,
And I am Mike Mateen.
and we are talking about movies nominated for a 2023 Oscar in our annual Oscar marathon. And tonight, we are going to be focusing on an accidental theme in some respects, both in terms of featuring characters of East Asian descent and also mother issues. In particular, the movies we're going to focus on tonight are Turning Red, the Disney animated feature, and Everything Everywhere All at Once, um, directed by Daniels, which is an odd credit. If people are not aware of this, this is actually two individuals, both named Daniel, who direct movies together and put their credit on the movie as Daniels, which I think is funny and interesting. But in any case, we are just continuing our effort to watch nominated films, and so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Once we finish those discussions, we may spend a little bit of time just forecasting, because of course, as we record, we are 1 week away from the Oscar ceremony.
Yes, almost there.
Yep. All right. So, which would you like to start with first? I feel like.
I mean, just we can just jump into everything, everywhere, all at once. So,
Okay, sure. You know, it is a it's a catch-all title for sure. So this is in many people are currently seeing this as the possible best picture frontrunner. It's nominated. It has the most nominations of any nominated film this year. I had previously said that I liked it a lot, but now you have seen it, so let's start with your first impressions.
so I didn't know anything about this movie going into it. It's just, whatever the radar and
Mm-hmm.
of which that, my media consumption. This was a movie that I was familiar existed, but didn't really know what it was. Obviously, it showed up on the Oscar thing. We've started talking about the Oscars
Mm-hmm.
as very, very highly rated. So I expected good things. I did not know what I was getting into, though. Um, which, yeah, obviously, for I mean, hopefully everybody here has either seen it or is aware that we're going to talk about spoilers.
Yes.
Pretty common
Spoiler
thing here.
warning. We are going to talk about what happens in the
We
movie.
always talk about
Yeah.
the movies and what
Yeah.
happens.
Mm-hmm.
So when it started, I was like, okay, so this is a movie about an immigrant laundromat business. Okay, tax issues. I mean, this stuff's. I mean, this is important stuff. I guess So I wonder what, but I don't know where it's going. And then the movie happens, right?
Yeah.
And it's basically like this taking what the concept that was built with like the Spider-Man in the multiverse, right? Like of
Mm-hmm.
like how there's multiple versions of everything, and just putting it into this, you know, Chinese American laundromat owning family and their tax issues and their daughter who, is sort of nihilistic and like has, like you said, mom issues, and the husband who is wants to divorce his wife but can't build up the courage. And so you have like all these actual human drama things that would be a normal movie all on its own.
Mm-hmm.
And then you introduce the idea that there's all these multiverses and they're sort of converging and diverging, and like it was just like, what in the hell is happening here? And it just kind of, to the point where like I had to go back and like reread after, like, the next morning. I had to like reread the plot to realize what I had just watched happen.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like it just didn't process enough into my memory because it like came at me so fast and so much.
Well, certainly, as the title and the poster would suggest, there's a lot going on. I don't want to necessarily. I want to encourage you to keep going with your impressions, but I am just fascinated because the trailer does let on the basic concept of what's happening here.
Yeah, I'd never
And
seen the trailer.
well, yeah, I
Is what I
know. I'm
realized.
just
Yeah.
saying so that even though I'm someone who generally speaking does not consider spoilers to be as big a deal as lots of people make them. Which that's subjective and it's fine. I'm not telling anyone else that they're wrong. It's just I generally don't worry about it. But that said, I'm fascinated with this movie in particular at how all of those reveals would play out when you really have no idea what's coming. Because probably the first hint of strangeness is Waymond in the elevator, right?
Yes.
Yeah. When he just suddenly kind of acts like he's entered a brief fugue state and now is talking in a completely different way and saying very strange things.
Right. And so I was like, okay, is this going to be like his story where, he's kind of like has this like divergent personality that's like going to give him the courage and like that's what it's about is about like finding courage or like would have been like a different theme of like turning
Mm-hmm.
red like oh this is the real Waymond who has the courage to speak up for himself.
Mm-hmm.
Not That's not where it went though.
No.
Yeah, but it was just like there was all
I
these
mean,
like there's a
he
couple of
does
things and
do
then
that,
and
but
then
it's later.
right,
But yeah.
and then it starts to get like a little like weirder and I'm still not 100% sure what's happening. And then I don't even remember exactly the first scene like with Jamie Lee Curtis where like
Mm-hmm.
there's something like one of those scenes like sort of goes like super off kilter and like
Right. So like he gives her the little ear things, right?
right.
And so she's wearing those during the meeting, and so she's having trouble following because she's getting, you know, information in her ears as well as where she physically is, and then
That's
eventually,
right. That's what's sort of like off kilter for the viewer too.
yeah,
Yeah.
and eventually she gets her sort of first fracture where she's aware of like two separate realities at the same time.
Right.
Yeah, and then from there it's just keeps escalating. So
Yes.
but yeah, so I guess like I think it's fascinating to encounter the movie that way. So did you find that like I mean, I'm sure it was confusing, but at the same time, did you find it like pleasantly confusing, like you're interested in what's going on, or was it kind of off-putting?
It, it mostly pleasant. It was definitely off-putting because it was like it was just like it took me a while to catch up, and by the time that I sort of understood, I was like, oh, this like literally is where this thing is going. Like this is
Mm-hmm.
we're all in here. Like once my mind caught up to that, now I was sort of like out like in almost like a phase shift from the movie. Like right, like I
Mm-hmm.
kind of knew where what was happening, but like I'd almost missed a few of how the plot points. That's why I said like in the morning I had to go reread it to even like kind of piece
Mm-hmm.
it back together. So that part wasn't my favorite, like because it was very much like it was so experiential
Yeah.
watching it,
Yeah.
but it wasn't like I didn't go on the journey like I feel like in the way to the point where like I wanted to watch it again, but at the same time like I just didn't have the time to invest in it. So I
Sure.
just like I said, my solution was to quickly like reread the plot and be like, oh yeah, yeah, yep, yep, I remember that happening. Okay, that's how that connects to that.
Mm-hmm.
And even now as I sit here, like I don't know that I could like spit it back the same
Yeah.
way. Like it's just that's sort of how
Uh,
it's almost like a dream.
yeah. No, I could totally see that. I think it's a movie that definitely rewards rewatching, in part just because its style is just throwing a million things at the screen at once. You know, and I mean it's stylistic and thematic. You know what I mean? It's like it's 100% intentional that it's just happening at a million miles an hour. And they don't stop to explain things very much, and things are just crazy things are happening, and some of them surreal, and some of them, um, like like you understand physically what's happening but not why, and then there are other times where like I don't even understand what's happening versus much less why or how or um, but all of those things like so I definitely would encourage you to rewatch it. I think it rewards that. um, but one of the things that has been a surprise this Oscar season for me is that I loved this movie. I did partly at least know what I was going to see when I went to see it. But I'm kind of used to this being the sort of movie that I love, but maybe not so much everybody else. You know what I mean? It's pretty weird. There's a lot going on. It's got some heady ideas that it also just layers in with some just real absurdity, and silliness, and even some gross out stuff. And like, I'm just sort of used to that being the sort of thing that I find interesting, but it's niche. Whereas now, not only is it the most nominated movie, but it's been winning all of the sort of lead up awards. And so it seems, not a lot necessarily, but front runner for Best Picture, and probably several other awards. And so that's the part that was surprising for me, but rewarding that so many other people have found a lot of, you know, interest and meaning in it. Um,
Yes.
so yeah, I am a big fan of this movie, and so I'm trying to hold myself back a little bit because I want to make sure you can get your your impressions out.
Yeah, mine are so I will say I enjoyed the movie. I think it's an incredibly well crafted movie. Um, as I sometimes like to do on this podcast, like I like to bring in, a third party witness of somebody who's not into movies as us, which is my
Hmm.
wife.
Yeah.
And so we watched after we had been doing like stuff all day, right? So again, like so that's probably also part of why like I was a little off put, but like she fell asleep like 20-30 minutes into the movie, not because she was bored, she was just like exhausted. And I don't
Hmm.
know that she was reading the subtitles, like because again the movie's probably, I don't know if it's 50-50.
Hmm.
It's definitely
There's
not a
yeah,
foreign language movie, but there's a fair amount of you know Chinese dialect that
yeah.
does have subtitles,
Well,
right?
and to be sure, even when the characters are speaking English, many of them do have strong accents, and so
Yes,
yeah,
but
it.
it's almost I was thinking about that too because I think that that's one of the things she doesn't typically. She has to be in the right mood for a movie with subtitles
Hmm.
because you have to like be on, right?
Yeah, this
And
is
that didn't really
definitely.
bother her, but I wonder if it didn't bother her because she just wasn't reading them because she was tired.
Hmm.
But anyway, she like asked me next morning. She was like, "So that movie that we started watching last night, did you finished it?" And I said, "Yeah." She goes, "So did you end up enjoying it?" And I was like, "I did." I was like, "Why?" She's like, "Well, because it seemed like I didn't really understand what was going on at first, but then it was like, but it was just felt like really interesting and like exciting." And I was like, that's kind of the movie. Like it
Yeah.
just you feel interested and excited, even if you don't know what happened. and and so I thought that was like a great descriptor of it, even for somebody who only watched like 30
Hmm.
minutes of it. Like it doesn't all that happens from there is it just gets more of that, right?
Yeah.
Like it doesn't
Right. Right. Like it certainly, especially if you're coming at it the way you did, where you don't know the premise, because like the premise that the part that you get from the trailer is essentially that there is, all of these different multiverses where things happen differently, and that we have our main character who's going to interact with all of that, and we see little bits of some of the fighting and some of the weird sort of almost, magical sorts of things happening, and weird, just weird stuff. And so the idea that there's going to be like multiversal, uh, sci-fi nonsense and just a lot of really strange things happening is tipped in the trailer.
right.
So it's you right up front when you start the movie that it's not going to be just a family drama about this, this couple that owns a laundromat and their daughter and her father and so on.
Yeah. I felt so dumb like about an hour into it. I was like, an hour ago, I was sitting there thinking this was some kind of like heavy-handed, like what did I start thinking it was like? There was the Spanish language movie that was like in black and white a couple of years
Roma.
ago. Roma, yeah. Like it almost felt like that to me. And
Yeah.
I was because it kind of starts like that, there's a
Hmm.
little back. And what I will say though about the subtitles is what I think their intention was, and I that it played out is that the character spoke English and Chinese in the situations in which they would normally do it.
Hmm.
Like if it was two Chinese people just sitting in their home, they would speak Chinese to each other, but when they would interact in the world, they would speak English,
Hmm.
right? Like it almost felt like that was what they were trying to do was do the reality of what this family would how they would speak.
Right.
And I kind of liked that.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit like, we talked about this, we got into it last year when we were talking about West Side Story and the characters, the way that, the bilingual characters who would go between English and Spanish or, even Spanglish, right?
Yes, a
Just,
lot of
and just
Spanglish in that movie.
doing it just very casually in a way that felt authentic to, the people in that place in that time, right? And so, it does seem like obviously I can't vouch for the authenticity of the Chinese in this movie, but that is certainly the impression it gives.
Correct. Yeah, and the same as here, but like I think I did for West Side Story, like I definitely know people who talk like that,
Hmm.
So that was very authentic. So if we kind of say this was similarly authentic, so
Yeah, yeah, the verisimilitude. Yeah.
verisimilitude, yes.
So essentially, we have our main character, played by Michelle Yeoh, who Evelyn, and she is Michelle Yeoh is been a cinema treasure for a long time. I just remember earlier this year rewatching Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon for the first time in a long time, and just watching that movie and just feeling like it would be so cool to be friends with Michelle Yeoh. She just seems awesome. But and it's interesting because as we meet her here, she's certainly not glamorous in her initial characterization, right? Because what do we learn about her right away? So she's trying to run this laundromat, but she also seems to have like a lot of side stuff going on that she's kind of doing all the time along with it. She is extremely disorganized to the fact, the extent that it's a problem. It seems like she's using all of these little hobby slash businesses sometimes maybe to avoid emotional interactions with her daughter and husband, to the point where her daughter, Joy, played by Stephanie Su, is gay, and it seems like there's a little bit of fraught stuff there because Evelyn it seems to be more or less okay with that, except she's doing the stuff like, but we can't tell your grandfather.
Right.
And so at the same time that Joy is, like, could be worse, I suppose, she certainly doesn't feel supported by her mother in the idea of, oh, my father's coming and you have to pretend that you're not gay. Um, that's no good, and so that's awkward and stressful for them. And then she has her husband Waymond, played by Ki Hui Kwan. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I should have looked it up. But of course, he is a delight to rediscover because, of course, he is known as a child actor from being in The Goonies and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and then
Oh,
kind of not anything else for a long time. He's been in Hollywood. He's been doing, or movie making. He's been doing a lot of things like stunt coordination and a lot of behind the camera things. But what a pleasure to have him reemerge as an actor in this movie. I just love him so much.
yes, I did love that as well because
Hmm.
that throwback to those was great.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, and of course it's not just nostalgia either. He's wonderful. He's just
correct.
charming as hell, and he is able to do all of the different notes that the character requires in this movie, which is a broad range, right? Because on the one hand, we first meet him as the nice to a fault, timid, doesn't want to say anything to upset anybody, sort of awkward, nerdy guy, right? But then, of course, once he's shifting gears, all of a sudden he's badass secret agent martial artist, beating people up with a fanny pack, whipping it around like a nunchuck.
Yes,
Um,
that scene is hilarious.
and just all the weirdness that's going on associated with that. And then, of course, we have James Hong as Evelyn's father, who has come from the old country to stay. He's causing a lot of tension there because she has lied to him a little bit about how well the business is going, and she is kind of keeping other things from him. And we get the impression that we understand why she might do that, even as we understand that it's maybe not healthy. And And so there's a lot going on, but and then of course Jamie Lee Curtis rounds out the principal cast as the tax advisor slash henchman of the antagonists. It all gets kind of complicated there, right? But those are the main characters, and ultimately what we discover is that uh, there are all of these different parallel universes, and in one of them, there was the most initial exploration and technology developed about how to travel between the different psychically travel between these different dimensions, and also to be able to access skills that the other versions of you have. So, for example, you can search through the multiverse and find one of the dimensions where you are an expert chef, or where you know everything about plants or something like that. And then you can sort of tap into those skills. But there is danger involved. It can be stressful on the mind. And what we eventually learn, this is skipping ahead. This is not in the order that we learn these things in. But what ultimately we discover is that in that sort of prime universe, Waymond and Evelyn's daughter, Joy, goes too far and accesses too much and becomes this sort of omnipotent but nihilistic force that seeks to destroy everything. Right? So the warning that this other Waymond Prime, brings in to Evelyn is essentially that she's coming for you, because she's going through all of these different dimensions and taking out the versions of her parents in them. And so that's kind of the threat, so to speak. But mostly what we're following is Evelyn's process of first being extremely confused by what's going on, then starting to understand at least the principle, the fundamentals of what's going on, and starts learning how to be able to do that. But then what she eventually, when she finally encounters Jobu Topaki, which is the sort of assumed name of this version of her daughter, confronts her. And so, but ultimately all of this gets tied into the themes of falling to nihilism and what that can mean, the idea of how do you live in a world where it seems like nothing you do matters. How do you reconcile choices that you've made, knowing that those choices locked out other possibilities? How do you make the best of where you are versus try to see what things could maybe actually be changed? And all of these things kind of going together, but all thematically linked with the idea of this broken family trying to heal. And so, and all of that happens at the same time that we get martial arts fights in an office where both characters in the fight are each trying to jump onto a butt plug, or like a trophy to be used that way, or discovering that you, in one alternate universe, are in a dedicated lesbian couple with the tax advisor that you have been hating so much, and you all have hot dog fingers.
That part was
very strange. But then also you discover there's a universe where you became a rich and famous movie star, and your husband became a big shot industrialist, and all it apparently took for that to happen is for you two to not be a couple. And just this, and there's some humor made from Evelyn, essentially the Evelyn that we meet at the beginning, essentially being told that she's like the worst possible version of herself. Like, you know, like you are so awesome in every other universe. This one right here is like the one where you made every single wrong decision. But of course, at the same time, the movie I think ultimately rejects that premise, right?
Yeah.
Because she chooses to stay there when she doesn't have to. And she chooses to try to use what she's learned to make it better, but not to let go of the idea that things should have been different.
Yes, that's what I like was the ultimate kind of message of the movie is, you know, whether or not there's truly multiverses or not, like, yes, we are the products of our decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And that is okay. Like, who we are and where we are is fine. We can
Mm-hmm.
choose to do different things in the future. We can choose to be better. We can learn from our mistakes, learn from our successes. Like that that's a great message that it ultimately I think left you with, is that with
Mm-hmm.
all this fun and flash and stuff like that part was memorable, is that okay, with all of this going on, like what it's really trying to say is maybe don't seek out the better version of yourself that could have been. Like maybe
Mm-hmm.
just make the next best decision so that you start to correct the path that you're on
Right.
or whatever, you know.
Don't lament not having made a choice that is no longer available to you.
Correct.
Figure out what you can do from where you are. And I think all that ties into also this idea of, you know, exploring the nihilism, because you know that, you know, Joy Prime, Jobu Tupaki, her first of all, you know, not everything is spoiled in the trailer, and so the bit where she's explaining her whole deal, saying that, you know, when she became essentially like all powerful godlike, she could do whatever she want, she kind of randomly decided to take everything and put it on a bagel. The ultimate everything bagel, and it becomes this sort of quantum singularity that could destroy everything. And her whole nihilistic approach is basically, um, everything sucks, nothing we do matters, it'll never get any better, at least on a cosmic scale, and so why not just get rid of it all? But what we discover later, like, first of all, everyone else is basically trying to just resist that. Like, can't let her do that, so we have to fight her. But ultimately, the process that Evelyn goes through is, instead of saying, you know, for essentially twofold reasons, right? Instead of saying, I'm going to fight this version of my daughter who has become suicidally nihilistic. Instead of doing that, she's going to say, I want to try to understand what's happening. But also, like, in the science fictional element of the whole thing, there's this idea of like, well, how do you fight her? She's all powerful. The only way is to try to become all powerful also, like she is, at the risk that you will fall into the same everything bagel that she has, right? But then what we also, of course, kind of discover through that is that it really is all kind of a cry for help, right? Like, she doesn't really want to destroy everything. She wants someone to persuade her why she shouldn't.
Yep.
She wants someone to succeed in that. But no one has really engaged with her on that level before, because they're all just trying to fight her to stop her and kill her. Even that's what everyone from the Prime Universe initially is saying you have to do. And from their perspective, they're still thinking of it like, well, there's a, you know, uncountable millions of different versions of each of us. Like, why are we you know, this one is the one that's become a supervillain and is going to destroy the universe. So yeah, kill her. But at the same time, when Evelyn kind of is able to, like, go and sort of understand what's happening and gain her own sort of equivalent power set, by, you know, absorbing all of what's happening instead of just flickering between one and another, she, um, like they can get to that point of saying that like if nothing we do matter, you know, it's not a brand new phrase, but the idea of if nothing we do matters, then all that matters is what we do, right?
Right.
Like this idea that like okay, there, even if there's no sort of cosmic fate or point or reward or punishment or whatever, there is simultaneously a kind of freedom in that to say, well, if there is nothing outside of yourself saying that you have to do something a certain way, then that means you get to decide. And so, you know, obviously that gets into some heady philosophical stuff that, you know, is perhaps like the movie is certainly engaging with, but we're not going to solve that philosophical question.
No.
But the other epiphany that is maybe my favorite part of the movie is Waymond's contribution to that, and not Waymond Prime, who has been killed by this point, but Evelyn's, you know, like our initial Waymond, the one that is introduced to us as her nerdy, nice to a fault husband who kind of lets people walk all over him and all that. But like his whole point is like you have the power to do anything, and sure you could use that to hurt and kill people. You know, you have the power to do that.
Right.
But if you can do anything, why wouldn't you do nice things? Why wouldn't you use your omnipotence to find the way to be so nice to these people that they stop fighting you? And I thought that was incredible when that happens, you know, and it's first of all so funny when she starts doing that, because like by then the whole dynamic has shifted a little bit. We understand a little bit more that, you know, Joy kind of wants someone to stop her, and now she's fighting her father, you know, her father from the Prime universe, who's still saying no. Well, you know, if we have to kill her, and so it's kind of this combo three-way conflict, and it is the genuine kindness of Waymond that kind of gives her the way through, and then they all kind of are able to, you know, ultimately reconcile everything and kind of come it all together. And like, so there's so much going on, but I just feel like at its core, this movie is, I think one of its just greatest accomplishments is that it goes so far afield in terms of all of these insane things happening, things that are exciting, things that are gross, things that are hilarious, things that, you know, some of them that initially seem like it's just a throwaway joke, but then they actually go somewhere with it, like the whole Rakakuni bit. Where this if anyone who hasn't seen the movie, it begins with Evelyn misremembering the Ratatouille movie, thinking that it's about a raccoon instead of a rat, and that it's called Rakakuni. But then later we discover that in one of the alternate universes where she has like super knife skills that she accesses, one of her fellow chefs actually is in a Rakakuni situation, and she initially gets, you know, reveals it and gets him fired, but then later realizes, wait, why am I? So he has a Rakakuni. Why is that a problem? It helps him be a good chef. Why is that a bad thing? It's not. And then they help each other. She helps him save Rakakuni, and it's wonderful. For such an incredibly silly thing, for it to be so moving is amazing, I think. And so I think having all of that stuff happen, but then ultimately at its core, it has explored all of these big heady ideas, both philosophical and just science fictional. But then ultimately, it's still really just about, you know, this family trying to find their way back to each other, and also, for that matter, being able to see this other human being presented to them as just an obstacle, as also a human being with their own thoughts and feelings and dignity. You know, so the Jamie Lee Curtis character, you know, initially is just like, why is she hassling us? she's mean to us, why, but at the same time to kind of ultimately recognize is like, well, like she's telling you about all of these problems, but she didn't write the laws. She's the one trying to help you fix it. And so trying to like being able to understand that about her. And so anyway, I love this movie quite a bit. So um, I am. This is certainly a year where I'm excited because my favorite of the nominated films does look likely to win. And as I mentioned before, I'm kind of just delighted by this movie that I would have thought was far too weird to ever be recognized at this level. Seems like it may well be. Which is not to say there aren't several other great nominated Best Pictures. We've talked about several of them already. So it's not like my heart would be totally broken if it didn't win, but certainly it's my favorite of the nominated movies.
Yeah. I mean, of the ones that I've seen, I mean, yeah, like you said, I thought my heart would be broken if it doesn't win. But like, if if this doesn't win and it's not like Top Gun or something like, just something totally out of character for the
Mm-hmm.
Academy, like, I mean, this is. But I also haven't seen some of the more traditional,
Mm-hmm.
movies. I Yeah.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm rooting for it as well.
well, good. I'm glad. I wasn't sure because you seemed positive on it, but having just seen it once and maybe talking about rewatching it, I wasn't sure if you were there with it or whether it was still kind of like I think I liked it. I'm not sure. So I'm glad to hear that. Um,
Yeah, no, I definitely liked it. It was,
mhm,
and I think it was a very like, and all the things that and especially it helped us kind of talking through it too, right? Like, because
mhm,
some of those themes are kind of they're in the back of your mind when you're trying to piece together like what the
mhm.
hell just happened,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So as we started like talking, I was like, oh yeah, that's right, because she did end up making the choice to stay, and like that's actually a big deal. And
Mhm.
like, oh, and that's right. And he did teach the daughter to like use the her powers for good, and like that's right. That was a big deal too. And there's so much crossover with, you know, ancient, like Stoic philosophy, religion,
Mhm.
Eastern philosophy, like all these, like it's not taking any of those sides, but it's taking like all the best stuff from like how
Mhm.
those things teach you to like be a person and
Right.
understand your choices and deal with your family and deal with events. And it's kind of telling that whole thing. And I was like, that's right, it does kind of do all that. I do remember feeling that when I was watching it, that this is kind of saying a lot of the really good things about how to be a good person and how
Mhm.
to make good decisions,
Right.
and be okay with having not made good decisions before. Yeah.
Because part of the conflict early on is, Waymond warns her that, you have to be really careful when you access these other universes because if you let yourself get too deep into them, you might kind of get stuck there psychically, right? And so there's a sequence of tension where she's in that one where she's become this movie star and she meets Waymond again at like the awards ceremony or fancy dinner or whatever it was. But they're not a couple, and there's this sort of recognition that like I was saying earlier, this idea that they each are far more conventionally successful and seem to have all of the things that they would each want, only they're not a couple. And yet, as they stand there talking to each other, it doesn't really feel like that's the better outcome, right? Like, and like you see them longing for each other even as they are acknowledging that not being with each other is what allowed them to have all of these other things. And just so like that is what ultimately makes her decision to kind of like because she could go somewhere else, right? She doesn't have to stay where she is, but she chooses it. And yeah, I think it's a wonderful movie, and I'm glad other people are enjoying it, although of course just by the virtue of it becoming a front runner, has certainly like it's a strange movie. Like I said, I was surprised that so many people also love it. It does not surprise me that there are people who don't, but of course, it getting the mainstream attention is brought out the people who want to try to make there be a backlash. People want to hate on this movie, and it's like, all right, I guess that's allowed, but I don't have to engage with it.
It's
Um,
always going to be a thing.
yeah,
It's always been a thing. It's always going to be a thing. There are
yeah,
people who
yeah.
are just going to want to, yeah,
Well,
be
and
mad.
and the thing is, it is totally fair and valid for someone to not enjoy this movie. Like that's fine. It's a subjective perception. But if someone wants to go on a Twitter crusade to try to explain to everyone else why it actually sucks, that I'm going to ask that they don't do it to me, or I will block them because
Has that happened to you?
no,
Oh, okay.
it's not to me personally. It's more just a matter of like I am aware that there is discourse where people are trying to do that. People who don't like hearing lots of other people talk positively about it, and so it kind of makes them feel like they have to go on and on about what they don't like about it. And mostly, I disagree with them. But it's what? Let's not even discuss that further. It's really not important. But
I need to run check. My dogs are being way too quiet,
okay,
and I'm here alone with them, and they're
all right.
downstairs. So it's gonna be very fast. But
Sure,
I
sure.
just want
Okay.
to go
So
see them.
I will. Yeah. So I think in the meantime, I'll just recommend that if people enjoyed this movie, it might be worthwhile for you to check out their previous movie that they made before it, which is called Swiss Army Man, which is another very strange movie, although in a very different, vein. Like I think it's also very good. I like Everything Everywhere All at Once more, but Swiss Army Man is about this guy who gets stranded on an island with a corpse. The corpse played by Harry Potter's Daniel Radcliffe, and the corpse variously begins to display magical properties that allow um, our main character to kind of survive in ways that are very bizarre and strange and occasionally gross. But ultimately, this magical corpse kind of gives him the ability to get off of this island and survive. And in some of the same ways that Everything Everywhere All at Once uses all of this plot strangeness to kind of coalesce around these philosophical and emotional themes, Swiss Army Man does also, where I won't necessarily spoil everything that happens, but you eventually learn that at the same time that it's not presented, like the island thing is not purely a metaphor, but it is also a metaphor of him finding a way to get through some of the emotional problems he's having that have left him isolated. And so that is also a good movie. It is strange in some of the same ways, although um, more grounded, relatively speaking, but also good. So that's Swiss Army Man, also directed by Daniels. But the thing that now that you're back, the thing that I wanted to do before we move on though is to just run through all the things that Everywhere is nominated for. So Best Picture, of course, also Director, Best Director, um, the Best Actress for Michelle Yeoh,
Yep.
and she is looks as though she is also you know getting good buzz and might well win. Um, and then for Best Supporting Actor, we have Ke Huy Quan as Waymond, and then Best Supporting Actress, we have Stephanie Su and Jamie Lee Curtis both. So lots of nominations there. Best Original Screenplay, which is it's the same directors, the same two guys, Daniel Kwan and Daniel Schneidert. Um, it is also nominated for Best Original Score and Best Original Song for the song "This Is a Life," and it is nominated for Best Costume Design. And boy, there are a lot of costumes in this movie for sure.
Yes.
and then best film editing. And so that's that's 11 nominations, which is the most of any. It's followed up by 9 each for the Banshees of Inisherin and All Quiet on the Western Front. But yeah, so at the same time that it's not obvious necessarily that it's a lock for all of those categories, it seems like it's the favorite for several of them. Just as a tossing it out, having to choose between Stephanie Sue as the daughter and Jamie Lee Curtis as best supporting actor. I'm not asking you to pick a favorite necessarily, but just like what are your thoughts on the two of them?
Like just putting them two against each other.
Well, I guess I'm just those are the ones where there's two up against each other rather than only one per category.
Yeah, I mean,
We haven't really talked about them either is kind of my point.
no, but I was like looking at that, and I mean, all four of the people that I've seen in this category, like Angela Bassett
Mm-hmm.
in Black Panther, Carrie Corden in Banshees, and then these two
Mm-hmm.
are phenomenal, honestly. And I I'm kind of rooting for Carrie Condon from the Banshees of
Yeah.
Inisherin because it just she you have two people that we know very well, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
two actors that we know very well kind of playing. Oh, now you're not going to be quiet, huh? Um, and, and she kind of grounds the movie a little differently.
Mm-hmm.
So, um,
Yeah, she is really good for sure.
yes. And as far as the two of them,
Yeah,
I,
it wasn't so much that I wanted you to pick your favorite among the two as much as we hadn't really talked about either of them. We only just touched on them, not talking there about the performance very much.
better go outside now. Go. You can't be here if you're going
I
to be
mean,
late.
I've been a big fan of Jamie Lee Curtis for a long time, and yet I feel like never quite seen her like this.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is that Jamie Lee Curtis is it's kind of like the same thing as I was talking about with like Carrie Condon. Like there's this whole thing going on, and she's like sort of the character that kind of grounds it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like she's part of it, but she's kind of outside. Like she's not really us looking in, but like she almost serves that purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of like the person outside of the family who's kind of like got brought into this thing and is like, why am I brought into this? And she does that. Like she just does a phenomenal job of like helping pull us into the story
Hmm.
while still being part of the story, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
what I was actually just thinking of it more because like she's really framed initially more like a villain, first kind of implicitly and then explicitly, right? Where
Right.
she is the one that certainly from Evelyn's perspective is the one hassling her about her bookkeeping. And it's like, you're not doing this right, you're not paying attention, you're in big trouble here and causing a problem and feeling like she's the problem, right? Evelyn's perspective is kind of like, why are you hassling me on this, right? And then, of course, as things start to get even weirder, she's like explicitly like a lieutenant for the villain, right? She's, a threat, physical
Yeah,
threat.
true.
Like,
Yeah.
who would have thought that we would see Jamie Lee Curtis doing special effects kung fu fighting? I would not have guessed that before I saw this movie.
Also
Um,
true.
and yet then of course showing those two sides, but then also the sequences where she's like in the relationship with Evelyn and and getting her heart broken by Evelyn, and then the broader things of her kind of showing her warmer side later, and like it's a lot of range there. And then of course Stephanie Sue, she's younger of course, but she's also showing a lot of range. She's doing like standard teenager, squabbling with parents stuff, but then also the kind of flip nihilistic supervillain, and a lot going on there too. I think the whole cast is wonderful.
Yeah, they do a phenomenal
Yeah,
job.
it's really only James Hong that didn't get the nom here, but I suppose that he's been around a while. People know he's awesome.
He has, and he's, I mean, he has important scenes, but he doesn't drive this thing forward
Yeah,
the way that the rest of them do.
he's his range is not as broad as all the other characters are in this. Not through the fault of the actor, but just in the story, he is in basically the two modes of, you know, stern father who has a lot of opinions, even though he doesn't really maybe completely understand what's going on, versus the, you know, uh, what what's what's it called in Mission Impossible? The guy who's in charge, you know, like the Alec Baldwin character, like they call him like like Mr. Secretary or something like that.
Oh,
Yeah, I can't remember, but like the point just being that he kind of feels like the guy who's in charge of the secret agent operation. It sends people out on missions, and then of course, you know, like in his badass robot mecha wheelchair. But yeah, so in any case, that's you know, lots of great stuff in this movie. And I definitely would suggest people rewatch it, even if you loved it the first time, because I feel like you definitely notice and absorb more every time you see it. That's how it's been for me, to be sure.
nice.
But so with that, let's go ahead and switch over to not as different a year as it might sometimes be, but we'll talk a little bit about Disney's Turning Red, which, as mentioned, just by coincidence, those being the two movies we decided to talk about, also deals with a lot of, you know, family, specifically mother-daughter issues, and is features a lot of you know, East Asian culture, although certainly not Asian American in this sense because they are in Canada. But we've got the you know, we're introduced to Mei Mei's family. She is a freshly 13-year-old girl attending, you know, junior high, or I guess middle school probably, and she is kind of an overachiever, helps at the temple that her family runs, and but also has her best friend and loves Four Town, this boy band. And they occasionally poke fun at the idea that why are they called Four Town when there's five of them, and is like, why does that matter? Doesn't really. But but of course, what she discovers after a nightmarishly embarrassing situation with her mom is that she is carries a family curse to turn into a giant red panda anytime she feels strong emotion, and that is, you know, kicks off the plot. And otherwise, it's Teen Wolf basically, right? I mean.
Yeah.
It's basically exactly the plot of Teen Wolf, only, you know, it goes different places by Act 3, but that's the premise basically.
Yes, and yes, if Teen Wolf had the other families' wolves
Mm-hmm.
coming after them, you
Yeah.
know, and the concept of like how they had to deal with them and all that kind of stuff. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what we learn once she's dealing with it is that her parents, um, promptly, we learn even before May does that that they know what's happening, and so they, you know, their first thought when we get the first comic sequence of her dealing with herself as a panda and hiding from her parents, they assume that what she is saying, you know, she's hiding in the bathroom saying, "Don't come in here." They assume she's gotten her period, which is
yes.
frankly not a bad assumption. I mean, from you know,
So
that said, it's revealed ultimately that they also know the other thing that it theoretically could be.
yes, so I had somebody tell me going into this that this whole movie was just a metaphor for getting your period, and I was like, okay, that seems like a weird thing for Disney to take on. I mean, I guess they could do that.
Mm.
And then I watched it and I was like, that is not what this movie's about. Like
Yeah, it's an
it's
oversimplification for sure.
right, like that is in there as
Mm-hmm.
in like, oh yes, sometimes they say, but it's a joke at the beginning that like that's what they everybody is assuming is
Yeah.
happening when she's embarrassed because of something that's happening to her. But that's not the deal. Like it's definitely more complicated than that
Oh,
and
yeah. I
more
mean,
interesting. Yeah.
the metaphor in that context is less central to the story and more it's part of a symbolic representation of becoming an adult and becoming a
Right.
woman, becoming who you really are. It's not really about getting a period, it's about becoming an adult, which that is kind of a symbolic sort of turning point for.
Correct. And that's and what it's almost saying is like the movie's almost saying that would be an
Oh
oversimplification, is
yeah.
that like that all of the other things that come and that you're feeling at the time
Yeah.
that happens to you are actually the more important things to be dealing with than the actual physical act of that you're now
Yeah,
ovulating,
well, like
right? Like it's all of the other parts. Yeah.
there's obviously a lot of things that happen in this movie that make no sense if you're sticking to an extremely rigid view that it's a period metaphor. Because,
Yes.
for example, I don't think most girls would be able to use getting their period as a way to make money to raise money to buy concert tickets.
Correct. Yeah. The fact
Um,
that like all the other that like she becomes popular and a fandom and sort of has like this weird fandom at her high
mhm,
school because of her ability to turn into a panda
right.
does not work with that metaphor, right?
Yeah.
Because all the other girls have the same thing. This is it's about the uniqueness of what she's, able to do.
Right.
And yeah.
Well, and stepping aside from like the supernatural elements of this story, I mean, ultimately what it's about is her discovering aspects of herself as she's getting older, as she's starting to go into puberty and feeling different things and feeling different feelings, and starting to get a sense that it's okay for her to feel those things, like, and to want to do different things. And she has always been very much the goody two shoes overachiever who makes her mom proud, and starting to recognize that like it's not a bad thing to want to make your mom proud and to try to excel in school and to serve the temple, a family temple. Like those are not bad things, but if you do only the things that other people want you to do at the cost of anything that you want as your own individual, that can be bad. Especially because what it can cause is, like a repression that can come out in other unexpected ways, um,
Yes.
such as in this movie, turning into a big red panda. So I think,
But then it balances it on the flip side of
mhm,
saying like just because you can turn into a big red panda and you can
mhm.
be popular and you can be invited to parties and you can make money, like doesn't mean that you always need
Like
to do that.
there's well, right, and there's risks associated with it, right?
Right.
It is not exclusively a positive thing. Like some of the points made in terms of why she should try to keep a handle on it are valid. Like after all, she does occasionally get herself into trouble because she is allowing her emotions to swing so wildly that she does some destructive things. She almost beats up Tyler, and like it's not all good. And so recognizing like, but at the same time, I liking that not being all good is definitely not the same as being all bad.
Right.
And
And the solution not necessarily being that you need to banish it from your life. Like all
right.
of these feeling, all of this thing that you want to do, because there could be some bad,
Mm-hmm.
it needs to be gone.
Yeah.
Right. And like the fact that like that's not that that is treated as sort of a more archaic, like an unreasonable way of living, as opposed to like, yeah, have those things. Like it's similar to like what we were talking about with the other one. Like when you've as an like adult, when you've made bad choices, you can make better choices. The same thing. Like don't if you have parts of your personality that are can be good, but if gone too far can be bad, like you don't just not use them.
Mm-hmm.
You have to manage it. Like
Yeah.
it's about managing the red panda aspect of your life, not getting rid of it. I like
Mm-hmm.
I love that part of the message, right?
Right. Well, and I like too that it's got some nuance in the sense that we're not meant to judge the rest of her family for choosing to seal theirs away again.
Right.
Right. It's I think where it comes down is that's a decision each of them needs to make for themselves. and either one is okay, but they should make it, each one person should make it for themselves instead of only doing it because someone else tells you you should or have to. You know, and that is, you know, May's biggest, you know, failing, you know, through, you know, much of the story is her inability to say no to her mom, right? To the point where she chooses to sneak around behind her back instead of openly being willing to even ask straight up, right? Because, for example, let's talk about like when she starts saying, "Oh, I can control it." We know that she has learned that it is thinking of her friends that helps her control it. But then when she's trying to explain to her mom why she can control it, what she says is, "I think of the people I love the most, which is you, of course." Right? Because she can't even, like, she's the one that introduced the concept. She could have just said that it was her friends. And then likewise, when she's asking about wanting to go to the concert, she makes her solid pitch for it, but she's not willing to, she's framing it all as like an academic exercise. Like, I want to broaden my musical horizons, as opposed to, they are my favorite band. I have been listening to them for a long time and I love them. Right? She's not willing to let herself be, in her mother's eyes, something other than this perfect girl, this perfect daughter. And that puts her into conflict with her own wants and desires. And as a result, she ends up lying and sneaking around instead of being willing to actually confront her mom on her real feelings. Which is, of course, how, you know, that's what all of this is really the metaphor for, right? Is the emotions of developing your own individuality and becoming an adult, as opposed to you know, the strictly biological function. But you know, it's all tied in together, right? Because think about how it all starts, right? Like this initial inciting incident, so to speak, is that little May finds herself doodling, and then starts feeling like, gosh, some of these doodles are making me feel things, unfamiliar things, but things that I want to explore further. But, and you know, and then of course, like the whole sequence, like I said, it just plays out like a nightmare, right? You know, it's like, oh no, her mom's coming.
It's awful. Yeah.
And one of the things, so certainly just this idea of it just starts failing at every turn. Like, oh no, she came in. Oh no, the notebook's visible on the floor. Oh no, I looked down at it. Oh no, she's looking at it. Oh no, she sees it. Now we are driving to the convenience store. And she is going to present these drawings to him and yell at him for taking advantage of her in front of lots of people who know her. It's just like, but I love following that, though, the little montage of her various reactions to this, right? We see her screaming into a pillow. We see her lecturing herself in the mirror. We see her crying at a picture of her mom and saying, "I'm so sorry." And then like determined to herself, like, I will never let this happen again. Because what she's trying to do is like shut down this new part of herself that has started to emerge, and that is, of course, what triggers this first transformation. But one of the things that I thought liked a lot about this movie, though, and which ties it thematically to an animated movie from last year, which is The Mitchells versus the Machines, which a lot of people really love. I like it a lot. I think it's very good in a lot of respects. But one of the things that bothered me about it is that I feel like it really lets the dad off the hook at the end. Because in some similar ways, we have classic parent-child not understanding each other. And then the dad does some extreme not okay things in terms of, like, we're not talking about like criminal, but we're talking about like making the daughter miss her college orientation by canceling her already bought plane ticket to make it a family road trip across the country without discussing it with her, for example. right? Like that's not okay. And stuff like that. Whereas her behavior towards him is really mostly just being mad when he does stuff like that. But then by the end, it kind of feels like the movie is saying the message is they really just need to both understand where the other is coming from. And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I think she's being very reasonable as an ordinary teenager, and he's the one that's out of control. And so we can understand that there might be sympathetic reasons for why he's doing it, but it doesn't mean that she needs to apologize for being mad.
Right.
Like, so I've kind of felt like it let him off the hook. But see, what I really liked in Turning Red by comparison is, to be sure, the movie is 100% on May's side in that whole initial circumstance, right? Like the
Yep.
mom is out of control. And not only that, like there's not even that, but like she continues to try to like spy on her at school. And we of course know that like part of what's happening there is she's suspecting that the panda is coming out, right? Like so she feels like she has to, but it becomes this extended controlling behavior, right?
Yep.
But the movie makes a fascinating turn at the end of I guess it's really kind of the end of Act 1 or start of Act 2, which is, you know, it's come out that she's turning into the panda. The parents have had the talk with her. They're trying to figure out like, okay, well, what's the next stage? We're going to try to keep it under control. But then what happens? May's mom gets a call from her mom, and we just immediately see her body language and behavior change. This woman who's just like, you know, everything is under control. I'm going to take care of this. How could she, you know, like we're, you know, this is all under control. And then we see her turn into a scared little kid as soon as her husband says her mom's on the phone. And we immediately are put in the perspective of saying, okay, so we can, this is where we start to understand where her own behavior was coming from. And I like that the movie really kind of, it's not as much as May, but it understands that for May's relationship with her mother to improve, we need to understand more fully what her mother's psychology is with all of this, right? And it becomes critical because we see how this has become a generational thing, you know, where you can be sympathetic with some of those behaviors, but at the same time, without it ever making it where we're supposed to just say, oh, it was actually fine what she was doing because she was doing it for understandable reasons. Like the movie doesn't ever suggest that she was right to do any of that stuff early on, right?
It suggests that like the pattern was wrong and that
yeah,
maybe May needs to help break the pattern by having more understanding.
right. So it's like how, because of course what ultimately happens as we build towards the climax is, you know, increasingly May is feeling like everyone is telling me that the only option is to put away this newfound part of myself that I am having fun exploring. And my best friends are telling me that they like the change in me. They think that I am more fun and more interesting. And I feel that way. But my family is telling me that that's bad and I have to stop forever. And so, but at the same time, to, you know, once she finally insists, like, no, I'm gonna keep it. She starts doing the ritual and she refuses. But that's where now we see the fault in the way that her mother has handled it, which is she's got it so repressed that by the time it accidentally is unleashed, it is totally out of control. And, you know, becomes giant kaiju red panda giant monster and a whole I will say I was pleasantly surprised by that whole climax just because I never would have guessed that the movie would have gone there. But it was so
I know, I agree.
yeah.
I wouldn't have as well.
Yeah, and then I like too that it really kind of does show all of it echoing through the generations because of course we see that the grandmother is very controlling in ways that you know, May's mother kind of was, but then having her own sort of understanding of, like, I I thought that we had taken care of this, but now I'm seeing that it's been just pent up and roiling underneath all this time. And that put everything I thought I cared about at risk. I thought that what we had done was to protect ourselves from this, but now I see that our method of protection is what's the problem now. And being willing to herself kind of reevaluate on all that. And then having all of that kind of play out, with May's also dealing with her friends. Her friends are great too, by the way. Like, what a great little foursome of teen girls we got in these kids. They've all kind of got their own thing going on. They're a lot of fun. Abby in particular, he's just very funny.
Yes.
And so we've just got all that playing out. But in the meantime, we've also got, like, how great is May's dad, right? Like, he's not the guy who's speaking out or always standing up, but, like, he occasionally is, like, he's watching and paying attention. He kind of leans in to say supportive things here and there. And then, of course, it's him that starts really kind of understanding where May's coming from. And, like, it's like, oh, May has told her mom that it was her friends who manipulated her into all of this. Well, she didn't even say that. She just let her mom say it and didn't correct her.
Right.
But he's the one that figures out that's not true. And not only that, but, like, he's looking at the video of her dancing with her friends and doing the panda stuff and having so much fun and seeming so happy, and just feeling like that's what we're trying to stop from happening. I don't know. But yeah, and then there's just lots of fun stuff going on. But I did want to jump back to.
He did also have, like, the great line of he was describing to about how when how he knew that she had a red panda,
Mm-hmm.
and he talked about, like, the reason that she had to get rid of it is because it was so big,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. And then when the giant red panda comes out and they're like, oh my god, that's what he's like, I told you she was big.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like it's such a funny, like,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't undersell it, like, but I just described what was happening. I just
Mm-hmm. But yeah, he's fun. And I wanted to jump back to what you had kind of or actually, I can't even remember if this was on the stream or not, but we were briefly talked about the whole boy bandness of it, right?
Yeah.
We are introduced to Four Town, this fictional boy band that May and her friends are obsessed with early on, and I love so much what they did with all of that, because I was never especially into any of the boy bands personally, but I certainly am aware of them as a big deal, right? Certainly at the time that this is set, especially, and it's clear that they love it. But what I think is great about this is that a lesser movie would have treated a 13-year-old girl's obsession with a boy band as silly or stupid or embarrassing, when in fact what it is joy in art and enjoyment of ordinary biological feelings of, like, finding a hot person hot, right? Like,
yeah.
that's it's an ordinary thing. It's not a bad thing.
Right.
To say, oh, I look at this person and it makes me feel things in my body. Right. And then also the artistic expression of it. And, like, boy bands are obviously, kind of, like, from an art perspective, you could call them sort of manufactured in ways that some other things aren't. But that doesn't automatically make it bad. It just makes it, like, smooth. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like easy to consume in a way that makes it broadly popular and makes a lot of people care about it and feel things in a way that art is supposed to. Right. having that not be treated as something to ridicule or um, laugh at these girls for. Like, we can laugh at it, we can understand it's a little silly, right? But at the same time, that the joy they find in it and the camaraderie they have in all appreciating it, and like their joy when they discover Tyler's into them too, like it's that's a good thing, right? And the movie treats it that way, and I really like that aspect of it. And I tell you, they set it up early on, and I was embarrassed that I hadn't seen it coming. But when they set early on and they showing us this ritual, and there's they're trying to initially turn her back, and they're singing their cultural song. But the guy, James Hong again, incidentally,
Yeah.
tells her, it's like, they like this song. It doesn't really have to be this song. It just has to be something from the heart.
That's where I was gonna go when you started going to this whole boy band thing. Like that was my favorite part.
Mm.
Is not only did they make the boy band like legit, like they leaned into like exactly what boy bands are like. Is
Mm-hmm.
even with the joke, I mean, of why are they? Is it called four and there's five of them?
Yeah.
Yeah, like because again the names are incidental. It's
Yeah.
hilarious. Like it
Well,
doesn't matter. Just, yeah,
also, the fact that when they're talking about the individual members, they have this guy who does this stuff, who went to art school, this guy who treats injured animals, this guy who speaks French, and the other
right.
two are also talented.
Yes. Which again was very much on brand with it. But the
Yeah.
fact that to your what you were saying is that like it treated it with a respect is that the fact that they could come on and their song was good enough because it just needed to be a song,
Yeah.
right? Like that's all it was saying is like
It's a
it
song
doesn't
that
have to
means
be
something to the people involved.
right.
Yeah.
It just has to mean something to the people involved. It doesn't have to be the greatest song. It doesn't have to be the right song for this situation. It doesn't have to be the most artistic.
Mm-hmm.
Like it can be manufactured. It can be whatever. As long as it means something and you like it,
Mm-hmm.
it
Mm-hmm.
works. And
Yeah.
like you
Yeah.
said, it was I didn't see it coming either. I
Well,
it made sense when it happened.
yeah,
What honestly, what I originally thought was going to happen was that they were going to learn the cultural song, but then I was like,
uh,
that doesn't make sense because he already told us it doesn't have to be that
yeah.
song.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah,
Well, and like it's such a great storytelling in terms of the reveal, because all of the necessary elements for the epiphany moment are laid in advance, right? We learn that about the song for the ritual. We also know that they love this band, and specifically that her friends do their own a cappella version of it to cheer her up when she's upset,
yep,
right? And so all of that is in place. There's plot stuff that works when her mother is tearing open the stadium. It works in terms of showing us that they're in danger, which puts an element of threat to the whole situation, but also is why they are still there when everyone else has run away. And then just the moment where, oh no, we don't have enough people, the song isn't working, the ritual isn't working, and it's almost out of time. But then we hear, Miriam, boots, pants, boots, pants, boots, pants. It just starts up, and then and Four Town kicks in. Goosebumps, man! That's such a great moment. It just works. It's so good.
it
Ugh,
was fun.
yeah.
Yeah.
So ultimately, I think Turning Red, um, like it resonated with me in a number of ways, and one of them is just in particular that like I don't turn into a giant red panda. I never have, but that said, I did have some of my own issues associated with being kind of a goody two shoes, perfect kid growing up, and eventually having to learn how to separate my own identity from that of my parents. So there's elements of this story that certainly resonated for me on that level, and and it's just well drawn in so many ways. There's such specificity about it, the choice of having it be in Toronto and just all the little details about her friends and the way they dress and the time period. It's just it's just well made. It's a good story.
Yes, it felt oddly specific to be made for parents who were teens to 20s in the early 2000s who are now parents of kids to watch this movie together.
Hmm.
Like, it just felt like kind of, but
Sure.
to the point of the credit of the movie is that those of us who aren't in that,
Hmm.
like, we still enjoyed the movie, even
Yeah.
if that was sort of, it's like the needle is threading with
Yeah.
the time period and that kind of thing.
Well,
Yeah.
I think there's obviously always several reasons for the standard like 20-year nostalgia cycles, which is partly just how it works just in the general emotion soup of the mind, but also it's just a matter of like once people are old enough to get the movies they want to make made, often they are at a point where they are thinking about their own childhoods that were about 20 years ago.
Also true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Turning Red is a great movie, and I think it is indicative of how strong the best animated feature category is this year. That there are three other movies that I liked even more than this one. Which is not to say anything negative about this one. It's just I think that there's a lot of great movies in the category this year. Um, let's just touch on that real quick.
Yeah.
The five best animated feature nominees, we have Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, which is literally the third adaptation of Pinocchio this year. But in any case, there's also Turning Red, and then Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, and The Sea Beast. And I think all five of those are absolutely worth watching. Um, the Sea Beast is on Netflix, and I think that it is. The story is somewhat predictable, which is really the only knock I would put against it. It's kind of a How to Train Your Dragon plot, right? But it's got a lot of great animation, fun characterization, and it's just enjoyable to watch. It's very easy to consume, and absolutely worth watching. Um, Turning Red, we obviously just talked about. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish is kind of an out of nowhere because at the same time that you would have sort of ordinary expectations for it as part of the whole Shrekiverse DreamWorks thing, it kind of like hits it out of the park as being the best movie out of that whole franchise, in my opinion.
Interesting.
Yeah, I will say, oddly enough, it's not that funny. Like it has humor in it, and it's okay. I laughed, but like that's not actually where the movie shines. Like the Shrek movies, have some real emotion to it, but they're mostly about the comedy and the satire, right? This one feels more like it's trying to tell a real story, and the humor is more incidental, which is surprising, but effective, I thought. And so I think it's actually really pretty good. If you're not familiar, the premise is that Puss in Boots, yes, the same one from the Shrek movies, etc., and he's had his own standalone movie already. This is the second one. Um, Discovers that he, as this, fearless adventurer, he has just lost his eighth of nine lives, and so he is told, like, basically, no, this is it now. So now you do actually have fear because you've been treating this like it's excuse me, fine. But then like so he's actually now spooked, and he tries to retire, but there's this scary as hell bounty hunter after him. And when I say scary, I mean like he's like a scary character, and it's really effective in that way. And but then they hear about this possibility that there is a wish granting fallen star that maybe if he could get to it, could get his lives back. And so like that's the premise of the plot. But it's really like it's taking this character and it's about fear of mortality, and what do you do with your life when you've lived it all one way but feel like you can't anymore, and do you try to get it back, or how do you come to peace with that when you've never really had to think about it before? Like that's what the movie is about. And so it's got obviously all of the sort of fairy tale nonsense stuff in it. John Mulaney plays Jack Horner, as in little Jack Horner, only he's not so little anymore. And he's like the villain, but it's also got like Goldilocks and the Three Bears in it, and like so there's a lot going on, but it's actually quite good. Um, So I want to just like I'm shouting out the other nominees because I think there's 5 great movies in the category this year.
Nice.
Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio is beautiful. It's a stop motion. The craftsmanship at work is incredible. It does things with the story that I've never really seen in any other Pinocchio story before. Like it adding, um, Guillermo del Toro style elements to it in ways that you wouldn't expect. Like instead of the whole Treasure Island sequence, it becomes um, a fascist child soldier training camp sequence. There's elements of the Land of the Dead in it, and it is often funny, but it's a heavier presentation than I think I've seen the story told in before. But I liked it a lot, and I found it very moving, especially towards the end. But the movie that has actually lingered the most for me is Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, which I only just watched a couple weeks ago on a plane, and loved it. But it's also the one that just has stayed in my brain. Like I keep thinking about it.
Really?
Yeah. Now, if anyone is entirely unfamiliar, which I wouldn't blame you, I would have been before hearing about, like that it got Oscar nominated. But I guess that there's some YouTube videos where they have they've made this little stop motion character who's just a little seashell they got a googly eye in the little, like the hole of the shell, and then little plastic shoes on him. And it's just a little stop motion character that they made some short YouTube shorts about. And now it's a whole movie of that. And
So I'm on like the flip side.
yeah.
I was so familiar with the YouTube videos
Oh, yeah.
that I was like, how the hell is this a movie?
Well,
Like,
I'll tell you the plot of the movie is that we've got Marcel, who's living in this house with his grandma, and they used to have a lot more family, but then there was this whole big sort of upheaval where the couple that lived in the house with them had a fight and split up, and most of the rest of the family, except for Marcel and his grandmother, were sort of inadvertently carried away by the man in the couple when he left. And so they're separated now and have no way to find each other. But the guy who is currently Airbnb-ing the house and has met Marcel and is he's the guy who's making the videos is the premise, right? Like he is interviewing. He's decided he's going to make a documentary about Marcel, and Marcel is kind of interested, but in part, what they kind of start deciding is like, well, you know what? Some of these little initial videos that we made and put on YouTube are getting some attention. Maybe we could use that attention to try to help you find your family. And so they start like trying to figure out like, well, how do they find out? The part of the problem is that Marcel doesn't know anybody's name. He doesn't have addresses. He doesn't know anything that's not in the house, basically. And so like, it's not an easy challenge. But it's kind of just about, the struggles he's having of, just, the way he kind of maintains his life, missing his family, taking care of his grandma, but figuring out what to do, or if he really even wants to, and then the effort of trying to find it. And like, that's the plot of it, is that he's trying to find his family, but it's just wonderful and charming and moving. And I liked it a lot. I've still, other than whatever bits of it are in the movie itself, I actually still haven't seen any of the originals. But Marcel he's just this cute little character. He is, sort of cartoony little kid in some ways, but also like he's kind of doing his best to be sort of an, more or less independent, responsible adult. He's, trying to do the things he needs to do to take care of himself and his grandma, and his, has complex feelings about things, even though he doesn't know very much about the world. Like there's a bit from the trailer where he's being interviewed about the whole thing, and they're saying, so how long has it been, since you lost your family? And he's like, well, I've been watching, seasons change, and I don't really know exactly how long it's been, but I just know that the hole in my heart just grows bigger every day. And then the guy who's been making the videos, who's also part of the interview, he just leans in and says, "It's been 2 years." And then Marcel says, "Oh, well, I guess that's good to know." And it's just it's very cute, but it's also kind of deep and sweet, and I really loved it.
All right.
All right, so I think maybe just really quick before we sign off for tonight, because we may have another update before the actual awards are nominated, but maybe not. Some things to be determined still. But just in terms of the Best Picture nominees that we haven't discussed, I maybe I could just touch on each briefly. Because I did manage to see all of them. So the ones that we haven't talked about include The Fablemans, which is Steven Spielberg's, slightly fictionalized autobiographical film about his own childhood. Is very good. What I'll say is that if anyone only saw the trailer and said, "Oh, that looks really kind of cheesy, sort of schmaltzy," I would say the movie is really not like that. The movie is much more sort of complex and ambiguous and clear-eyed about the idea that finding filmmaking is not just some like beautiful artistic pursuit. It's reckoning with the idea that sometimes choosing something like an artistic pursuit can actually take you away from other things, and it can be complicated, and sometimes it can actually be a struggle viewing your own life as though it's through a camera lens all the time, and understanding the complex relationships of your family, and the flaws and positives that everyone has that can be observed but not always understood in your own family, and it's really about all of those things, and I think it's very good. Because little Sammy, who's the Steven Spielberg stand-in character, his first foray into making movies is not about, "Oh my gosh, I love this art film, I want to do that." It's about having been so scared by a train accident in a movie that he feels the need to reenact it with his model trains in order to maintain some sort of a feeling of control over it. Which is interesting because it's not like this beautiful artistic pursuit at first. It's more a matter of like to try to stop having nightmares about it. But yeah, so it's very good. Tar is a fascinating movie that I think I need to think more about. It's very good, but it's extremely stressful, and it's kind of an unconventional narrative in some respects, because what we have is a main character who in several ways is kind of awesome, but in also several other ways is really pretty awful. And the movie is basically just her already doomed, doing everything she can to stave off the inevitable outcome of her own actions. So she has made a number of poor decisions prior to the start of the movie that she is trying to keep running away from, and it's not going well. But Cate Blanchett is just incredible in this movie as an extremely complicated character, and it's very stressful just watching her try harder and harder to not let the mistakes she's made ruin her whole life, at the same time that we, the audience, are thinking she kind of deserves it in some respects. She didn't like, we don't necessarily, we're not rooting for people's lives to be ruined necessarily, but she did some awful things. And so but at the same time, she's very cool and passionate in other respects, and you can it's complicated and interesting. And then All Quiet on the Western Front is adaptation of the novel, of course. It's set in World War I, basically about these one kid in particular, but also his friends who are enlisted into the army to fight on Germany's side in World War I, with lots of suggestion that it is for the fatherland and all of that sort of thing, and then gradually are shown the horrors of war over the course of the story. Um, it's well made. I don't know that there's anything especially wrong with it. I'm not even really criticizing it, except that I did kind of watch it feeling sort of like I don't know that we really needed another one of these. You know, it's like, I mean, it's good, but it's also kind of like I've seen it before.
Right.
Um, Triangle of Sadness, I think, is the only one on the list that I didn't really care for. I don't like it. Um, I respect what it's doing. It's kind of about, you know, satirizing the you know, the ultra rich on this luxury cruise, and kind of about the complex interrelationships of power and wealth and class and all of that sort of thing. And it's you know, like, it has some interesting ideas in there, and there are parts of it that I like a lot, but overall I kind of found it kind of tedious to watch ultimately. It's way too long. Um, and then Women Talking, I only just watched recently. It's the most recent of the ones that I saw here. And it is structured in a very interesting way. Like, the closest equivalent might actually be something like 12 Angry Men, because the premise is that we have a number of women who all live on, I don't think they're Amish specifically, but that'll give you the basic idea that they live on kind of an Amish colony. And what has happened prior to the events of the story is that apparently there was a whole rash of sexual assaults that took place where men were drugging women with cow tranquilizers and raping them. Awful, of course. But what has happened immediately prior is that they have been told that even though the men in question were caught and arrested, that the colony intends to bail them out, and the women have been told to forgive them. So the women are having a meeting to discuss what to do about the situation, with the primary options being do nothing, stay and fight, or leave. And essentially, the whole movie is them trying to just figure out what to do. But it's not boring. It doesn't all take place in one room. There's a lot of different characters going on, but ultimately the story is condensed to these characters trying to decide what to do next about their situation. And it's really wonderful. It's very good. Beautifully shot as well. But yeah, so
Nice.
it's quite a crop of best pictures this year. I mean, even the one that I didn't especially like is one where I just like, I don't know, it didn't work for me, as opposed to any, you know, there's been past years where like I more thoroughly disliked one or two of them, you know. It's like, but like in this case, it's more just like, I get it, but it's not for me. But yeah, in any case though, anything else you want to touch on before we sign off for this update?
No, I think we're good.
Okay, well, so those of you listening and or watching, we may manage to put out one more update before the big day, but we will certainly come back after the awards to revisit the winners and discuss any of the new ones that we have seen between now and then. But in the meantime, everyone, watch good movies.